In this video, I'm breaking down 5 Pro Tools settings that will help you streamline your workflow so that you can focus on making music and not get stuck dealing with technical headaches. They'll help you create faster, remove latency when you're playing a MIDI instrument, and help you start creating music faster every time you open Pro Tools. There's a reason why it's still an industry standard, and those who use Pro Tools successfully know exactly how to set it up so that Pro Tools works for them, instead of trying to work around things like too many plugins or really bad latency. One of the most important settings that you need to know how to adjust in Pro Tools is the Playback engine optimization. The Playback engine is the part of Pro Tools that's responsible for handling your computer's power and how it manages different things like recording or having a ton of plugins for creating or mixing. Knowing how to run your Playback engine is going to ensure that your computer runs smoothly. For example, your Playback engine should be set one way when you're recording, and it should be set a pretty different way when you're using a lot of plugins like with virtual instruments or when you're mixing or mastering. To adjust your Playback engine, you're going to go up to Setup and down to Playback engine to bring up the Playback engine window. When you're recording, you'll want to make sure that the buffer size is set pretty low. I usually keep my buffer size between 32 and 64 samples. What the buffer size does is it determines how much time it will take your computer to process audio and play it back to you. So this directly affects things like latency or recording. You want to make sure that your buffer size is as low as your computer can handle while still being able to record through whatever audio interface that you're recording through. All to say, when you're recording, low buffer size, because that makes space for your computer to be able to process the incoming recorded audio in a low latency, very clear way. If you have virtual instruments and plugins set up while you're recording, like for example, you play a synth part or you have the drums affected with a bunch of plugins and you need to have all of those plugins live while you're recording, if you're in a situation where you can't freeze any of the tracks or commit them to printed audio, then you can bump up the buffer size just a little bit, but you don't want to go any higher than 128. If you really don't have much processing power, go all the way down to 32, print anything you have going to audio so that you're using as little computer processing power as possible to make sure that you have the highest quality, lowest latency recordings. If your buffer size is set too high, it can lead to crashes, glitches in the audio itself, so you really want to make sure that the buffer size is set pretty low. Now, when you're not recording audio and you're focused on MIDI recording or virtual instruments, this is when you can start to bump up the buffer size a little bit higher so that it opens up more processing power for your computer to be able to process what's happening. When I'm in MIDI recording and virtual instruments mode, I usually set my buffer size at either 128 samples or 256 samples. This makes it so it opens up more room on my computer to process virtual instruments without taking up too much of my computer's performance. And finally, when it comes to mixing and mastering, and I've got a really plug-in intensive Pro Tools session, this is when we want to get the buffer size as high as we possibly can to get all of the computer's processing power into the plugins so that there's no glitches, no hiccups, and I can end up with a pretty clean quality mix. Now, if you run into error messages that tell you that you need to increase your buffer size and you keep running into it over and over again, that usually means that you have too many plugins happening at the same time for your computer to handle. So if you're recording, turn down your buffer size to 32 samples or 64 samples so that your computer can focus on recording low latency audio into Pro Tools. And a cool extra little setting here that I like to use, I like to keep dynamic plugin processing turned on. That means it's going to conserve or take away any processing power that's going to tracks that are currently not active or being used. And it redirects that power to plugins and virtual instruments that you're using in the moment on active tracks. Now remember, a lower buffer size usually means lower latency, but it can put more of a strain on your system because it's focusing the processing power on the playback and the recording that's coming into Pro Tools. This next one feels like a no-brainer, but this is going to save you time. You'll want to save session templates so that when you're starting a new track, you can skip all the time you would usually take to manually add tracks, add plugins, add EQs, compressors, virtual instruments, whatever you would add manually, and dig through all your plugins folders to put into your session manually. Session templates help you save a ton of time. Let's say you've got your Pro Tools session set in a way that you know that you're going to have at least these set of plugins ready to go for when you want to start making something again. So to set up this session as a template for you to use later, first thing you'll want to do is make all the plugins inactive. What that does is it reduces the likelihood likelihood that your Pro Tools session crashes when you try to open up a new session with a lot of plugins active every time. What we'll do to start out is pick a name for the template. We'll call this Pop Pro Tools Session. Save. Okay, so now I'm in a different Pro Tools session. By the way, if you're on Mac, I'm holding Control, Option, and Command. And what that does is for every vertical row of plugins you see here on the left, it will deactivate every third plugin on every track. If I click on the second plugin of this track while I'm holding Control, Option, and Command and just click once, it will deactivate every single insert in the second space of every single track. It's kind of a nice quick way to turn a bunch of stuff on and off. I'm gonna do that again for the first insert on this track. Boom. Okay, so everything else is done. Next, what we'll do is we'll go to File, Save as Template. If I want to, I can create a category. Right now I have a category simply called Music. I'll keep the name of the template that I named the Pro Tools session, Pop Pro Tools Session. I'm gonna keep the option selected of Install Template in System. It'll just have it ready to go. If I have specific audio files for some reason that I know I want to use every time, I will check the Include Media box, but I'm gonna leave that unchecked for now, and I hit OK, and that's it. So when you want to start a new session and the opening dashboard window pops up, all you have to do is find the template group section, find your template, and as you see, we have Pop Pro Tools Session already right here, ready to go. And I just click Create. Next up is making sure that your exported tracks are optimized for sending them to streaming services or exporting stems for remixes, because exported music for streaming on Spotify should be exported differently than the music that you're trying to send for TV or sync placements or any kind of TV or ad placement. So we're gonna go to File, head out to Bounce Mix. When you're exporting your music for a streaming service like Spotify or Apple Music, you'll want to make sure that the sample rate is set at 44.1 kilohertz. That's the standard for those streaming services. You'll want to have the bit depth set to 24-bit for better quality, but you could also leave it set at 16 if you wanted to. Now, if you're exporting audio that you know is gonna go straight into a YouTube video, you'll want to change the sample rate from 44.1 to 48 kilohertz. 48 kilohertz is the standard sample rate for anything streaming video wise, like YouTube or Netflix. So if you're submitting your music for TV placements, they're going to ask you for the WAV files that are set at 48 kilohertz and 24-bit bit depth. You'll want to make sure in the file format dropdown that interleaved is selected so that you're not sending out a mono file. Interleaved basically just means that it's keeping things stereo, right? Panned left and right, however you have it panned in your song. And then you click bounce and you're good to go. Now, if you want to export stems, there's a couple ways to do that. Let's say that I want to send this tambourine part to someone that's asking for it, that's remixing my song. What I usually do is I place a marker, it's just called verse here. That's going to be the same exact starting point of every single stem. Let's say I'm handing off a bunch of stems to another producer or a mixing or mastering engineer. All they have to do is drag and drop the audio files into their workstation, and all the audio is lined up in the same place, ready to go. They don't have to move anything around to line up things. It's all ready for playback and mixing. So I'll highlight this, and if I don't need to fix or adjust any fades, I'll hit Shift Option 3, which is the shortcut to render any clips together as one audio file. What you'll do is you'll make sure that the clip is selected. You head over to the clips window, click the down arrow, and go to export clips as files. Then this export selected window pops up, and it'll bring up an export menu where you can set the bit depth and sample rate in a similar way as to what we were just talking about with streaming or with video. I'll keep the bit depth at 24-bit, and I'll keep the sample rate at 44.1. Make sure I know which file folder it's going to, and then I'll click export. Boom, hit save, it's going to that file. And you can do this with all the stems at once. Once you've cleaned everything up, printed anything you need to print, and it's all consolidated, you can select them all, go to the drop-down arrow in the clips window, select export clips as files, export all the stems as a batch if you want to. Now, if you need to send stems to someone and you don't have everything printed on an audio track, or you don't want to take the time to do that, it can take a little bit longer, but you can simply highlight one track at a time so that any delays or reverbs that you have set up as sends into other effects can also be heard in the bounce that you make for the stem. Another quick setting that I like to use when I do have a lot of things running in my session that's taking up a lot of my computer's memory, and I know I'm gonna need to switch between recording a vocal and then diving back into MIDI recording and using virtual instruments, is simply going to the options menu and going down and having low latency monitoring checked. So let's say I'm recording a new vocal part, and every time I enable record on my track, I don't want to constantly turn plugins on and off. With low latency monitoring selected, I can simply just click record, and it automatically deactivates any plugins on that track. This is really good for if you have quick inspiration and you're like, oh, I want to record this really quick. Boom, I select record, the plugins are already deactivated, and as long as my buffer size in the playback engine is low, I'm able to hear what I'm recording at low latency in time with the music in my session. Knowing those Pro Tools settings are going to save you a ton of time in making music, whether you're at the beginning and you're just starting a new track idea, or if you're at the end and you're ready to send something for streaming. Having these settings in the way that I talked about in this video are going to help you speed up your creation process. If you want to dive even deeper at understanding how to take a track from the beginning of the creative process all the way to the final polished mix and master, check out the link below to my course, Next Level Producer. I've put over a decade of experience into over 40 videos that are my step-by-step guide to going from a no-name producer in a college town to selling over 200 tracks to a major label, sitting in those record label offices in cities like Los Angeles, New York, London. I dumped all of that knowledge into one course. Check out the link below if you're interested, and let me know in the comments below if you have any other Pro Tools hacks or settings that help you so that I can see what you're up to in Pro Tools and so that other people can increase their Pro Tools knowledge. That's it for now. Peace out.